Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Hello, everyone at home
Yeah, welcome
watching.
everyone. Hi.
Hi. God bless you guys. Welcome to Bible study. Happy Valentine's Day for
Happy
those who
Valentine's Day.
celebrate. Happy
Yes.
Love Day. God is
Thank you for
love.
for
Def-
joining us on Valentine's Day night.
yes, yes, definitely. You could be anywhere, but we appreciate you being here with us
Appreciate
as
it.
we journey through Bible study through the Old Testament. Ben, how you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you feeling?
Good, good. Feeling
We're
good?
going into Exodus.
Yeah, Exodus, which is yeah, we went into Genesis and now we're going into Exodus.
Yep.
We continue on this journey. So again, we thank you for joining us. God bless everyone in the comments.
Yeah.
Who we got in the comments, Ben? Who we got in there?
I saw Ben. I saw the other Ben. Or maybe I'm the other Ben, I guess.
No, yet you're both equally the other Ben.
Amanda. Hi, Amanda. All our Pastor Ezekiel, Ryan, Hector. Hey, Hector. Hey, everyone.
Yay. Robert, Ivana, God bless you guys.
Anna.
Thank you for joining us. We
Thank you,
appreciate
Robert.
you. And yeah, no, we're gonna continue this journey into Exodus, journey
Yeah.
through the Old Testament, which very very excited.
Mhm.
Um,
If you all joined us last time, we went through Genesis, and we talked about a lot of themes. Actually, just as a quick refresher, we brought up a lot of these themes that were through Genesis. They're not all of the themes. In fact, you'll see that today, as we go through Exodus, that Jesse is going to bring up some new themes that really come up in Exodus. But some of those will have, in a way, started in Genesis, even though we hadn't talked about them yet. And so, if you see Jesse, if you hear Jesse reaching back into Genesis, don't be surprised. In fact, we're probably going to do it throughout the whole Old Testament. So,
yeah,
um, so don't be surprised by that. But those were some of the key themes that we focused on in Genesis. Um, as we uh, as we transition here, I'll be handing it over to Jesse, who will be taking us through Exodus. But just as a quick recap of where we left off in Genesis in our narrative, was with Joseph. Who, if you've been following Ezekiel's Dreamer series, you know a lot about. But
yeah,
he had went into Egypt against his will, but being faithful and true and living in the wisdom of God, flourished and found abundance, and even came to be a blessing to Egypt, which eventually led him to being a blessing to his brothers and his family, who all eventually ended up coming to Egypt. And it was actually a really sort of happy ending to that, to the end of that book. They're in Egypt, but that's sort of a good thing. They're abundant. The Pharaoh really likes them. Everything's great, and they're in Egypt. And so that's where we leave off the story, is that Jacob, or Israel, and his 12 sons and their sons' family and his sons' families
yeah,
have moved in full time to
yeah,
Egypt, and
yeah.
are living a sort of a little bit of a abundant life there.
Yeah, and I found it very fitting. Like I was like, oh, how profound is it that we ended the Dreamer series on Sunday,
Yeah.
and now we're going into Exodus and
Mhm.
Bible study, which is a really cool transition.
Yeah.
I was like, look at you, God, look at you and your transitions. You're perfect. But I also, yes, the series has been amazing. We encourage you guys to watch it back. It's honestly been one of my favorite series that we've done in the church so far. So I encourage you to hear the series back. I encourage you to hear the last Bible study as well as we journey through Genesis. Just want to give a quick shout out to you, Ben. You did an excellent job. It was amazing. And it's just an honor and a privilege for me to continue now. After you did an amazing job in Genesis, to be able to continue into Exodus. But before we do that, I would like us to pray.
Hmm.
Um, Ben, I don't know if you would like to lead us in prayer.
Yes, I can do that.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead, my brother.
Oh, Heavenly Father, we gather today to dive into your Word, and the narrative in which you've revealed yourself to us through. We thank you for that word. We thank you for your wisdom, and we ask that you'll guide us, open our minds to see what you're doing and what you're trying to communicate, and to just be have soft hearts as we come to this word. I ask and thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. So let's get into it. We're going to the book of Exodus in one sitting. We did it in Genesis. Some thought we couldn't do it, but you did it, Ben. So I believe we can do Exodus too. So, so
If anyone who's watching that has already read through Exodus, like I'm hoping that you have, then really just great job. Thank you so much for doing that. I know that
yeah.
that's each of these books is dense and difficult, and I know, and so I if you got to the end of it, like that's awesome, and I appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go. Let's do this. Exodus, a year journey through the Old Testament, the book of Exodus. So, quick introduction to Exodus. The title Exodus comes from a Greek word that means going out, which is very fitting for this book subject, right? Because we're going to be reading about the exit of the Hebrew people from Egypt. Now, this text is not named its author, but Jewish and Christian tradition ascribe the book to Moses. They believe that Moses did write the book of Exodus and most of the Torah. So Exodus begins where Genesis leaves off, like you said. The descendants of Jacob are living in Egypt and have multiplied into a large community. But Egypt's new king, this Pharaoh, right, um, regards the Israelites as a threat and forces them into slavery. And Exodus just tells us the story of how God hears the cry of his people, delivers them from Egyptian bondage, and leads them into freedom. So let's get into it. Like I
Um,
said, yeah,
Sorry,
go right
just
ahead.
real quick, I want everyone to know that we'd love for you guys to be engaged in this. If you
Yes,
have
please.
questions, just feel free to put them in anytime that you see fit, and we can either address them when we see them, or we'll find a good time to pause to address them. But we would really like to see your questions and to talk about them. And if you have any of your own insights that you'd like to share with the others that are watching, please do so. We love to see that engagement, and you all have a ton of wisdom that we don't have,
Yeah,
and questions themselves are very edifying for everyone.
yeah.
So
Last time the engagement was incredible.
yeah.
Like it really blessed me to see you guys so engaged. So anything you want to give, go right ahead. Questions you have,
Mhm.
let us know in the comments, and we will get to you, like Ben said. So yeah, so let's get into it. Exodus chapter 1, verse 1 through 6. We already hit a theme that is familiar to us. If you were here for the Genesis Bible study, last Bible study, we hit the theme immediately. We hit the theme of abundant blessing. So you read Genesis, I mean Exodus chapter 1. We also see, just like in Genesis, an emphasis on genealogy. And what did we say last time? Caitlin said it in the comments, and people were saying it. Genealogy matters, right? And we see that it does right off the bat in Exodus chapter 1. So we also read that Egypt becomes this fruitful place because of Joseph, right? Not just because of his plan that he had, that God gave him, and through God's wisdom he was able to interpret Pharaoh's dream, right? He was able to have this create this plan when it came to the 7 years of abundance and the 7 years of famine. But literally, Egypt becomes fruitful because of Joseph, because of Joseph's family. And we'll see that we're going to read that here. We read in Exodus chapter 1, verse 1 through 6. We read, "These are the names of the son of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulon, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all." That's 70 in all, the descendants of Jacob. That's a lot of people. That's one guy.
Generation.
Yes. Joseph was already in Egypt. This is just Jacob, right? So now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. So yeah, so we see that theme here of abundant blessing, right? Um, and what do we see here? What are some things that we see here? Some common things we see here. The same way we saw abundant blessing in Genesis chapter 1. We read there that God commands humans to what? To be fruitful and multiply, fill the land and subdue it, right? This is what this is literally what humans were supposed to do. This is what God is telling humans. This is your task, to be fruitful, multiply, fill the land, and subdue it. And here in Exodus 1, we've seen some of that. We have almost all those things taking place because we can read what that Israel has been fruitful, right? They have multiplied. The land is filled with them. They filled the land, right? But there is a missing piece, something that they're supposed to be doing hand in hand with being fruitful. And that missing piece is subduing. They're being fruitful, they're multiplying, obviously, but they're not subduing. Instead of subduing, the Israelites are the ones that are being subdued by the Egyptians. So Pharaoh is oppressing them and it kind of subverts them, like the opposite, cause them to do the opposite of what they're supposed to do. What they are supposed to do is being done to them. So that's what we're really hearing. So again, that key theme is abundant blessing. That's again a theme from Genesis. Now we hit another theme as we continue reading Genesis 1. We hit the theme of another theme we saw in Genesis entitled Whose Wisdom, right? We see it here in verse 8 through 13. It says, Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. So, and if wars break out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they were multiplied. So it's like the more they try to oppress these people, they multiplied, right? And spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. So here, where here we have like we read in Genesis, we're reading about Joseph, we're reading about his brothers, his family, where Egypt used to be a blessing, a place of blessing. It became a place of blessing for Joseph and his family, right? Now becomes this place of oppression for Joseph's descendants, right? So in Genesis, we read about Joseph using God's wisdom to not only interpret then Pharaoh's dream, but to also come up with this elaborate plan or process for the 7 years of abundance versus the 7 years of famine in Egypt. Exodus 1 verse 8, we read it here. It tells us that this new Pharaoh, to understand where we are. This is a new Pharaoh. Joseph and his brothers and that those descendants have passed away. Now there's a new Pharaoh and it says that Joseph meant nothing to this Pharaoh. We read in verse 10 that he said, we need to come, let us deal shrewdly with Israel. So verse 10 we read deal shrewdly, right? That term deal shrewdly. In Hebrew, the word for deal shrewdly in this verse is hakam, which means to be wise, right? We read in Genesis 3:1, we read that now the serpent was shrewder than any of the wild animals that the Lord God made. He said to the woman, is it really true that God said you must not eat from any tree of the orchid? Right? So look at that correlation. Pharaoh saying, we must deal shrewdly with these people. The serpent says in Genesis 3, and it says in Genesis 3 that now the serpent was shrewder than any of the wild animals that the Lord God has made. So in Exodus 1:10, we see Pharaoh sort of acting as the serpent. We have this new serpent character, which is Pharaoh, right? And he thinks by dealing shrewdly with the Israelites that he's using wisdom. He thinks that his way of dealing shrewdly with them is wise, right? And like that, like Pastor said here, Pharaoh equals the ankle biter. We see this new ankle biter in
Yeah,
Pharaoh, right?
we see that it's like they almost like the first Pharaoh, or not the first Pharaoh, the Pharaoh prior to this, during Joseph's time, he saw that the wisdom of God was in Joseph and trusted that wisdom. So that Pharaoh was trusting God's wisdom. This Pharaoh is trusting some wisdom, but it's not God's wisdom. And
Yes.
we'll see how this turns out. When the other Pharaoh was trusting God's wisdom, it was great for Egypt. We'll
Yeah.
see how this turns out for Egypt going
Yeah.
this way.
When Pharaoh trusts his own wisdom, right?
That's the point.
When he thinks he's dealing truly with the Israelites. So how does he deal truly with the Israelites? He does this by trying to abuse of his power and oppress Israel. Why? Because he doesn't want why? Because he doesn't want his slave labor to force to scatter. He doesn't want them to leave the country, right? They are a threat. To him, he sees them as a threat, right? Which brings us to our first theme in Exodus, which is the theme God opposes the proud. Right? Also, by Pharaoh stating, "Come, we must," Pharaoh kind of sounds like these people we met in Genesis chapter 11. He repeats his arrogance of these brick makers in Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, who they said, "Come, let us build a city and a tower to try and establish our own fame and to avoid being scattered." Right? You can read that in Genesis 11, verse 3 to 4. So we see from that, we see in Genesis how God has already demonstrated his commitment to opposing the proud.
Mhm.
Right? You see that God is opposes the proud. Right? In response, we will see how God will deal with Pharaoh's or Egypt's pride and oppressive policies towards Israel. And just like you mentioned before, Joseph was using God's wisdom, right? Which then became a blessing to that Pharaoh, became a blessing to Egypt. But this Pharaoh is using his own. Now this Pharaoh thinks he's wise, but he's going to show himself to be terribly unwise. And his wisdom will affect the Egypt that is to come after him. During his time and the Egypt to come after him. So then we get into chapter 2. Also want us to get into a mindset now from between the time of Exodus 1 and Exodus 2. The time in between those chapters is approximately 400 years. That's around approximately how long the people of Israel were in slavery. So we get into chapter 2, it's 400 years from chapter 1.
It's a big
Right?
fast forward.
The big fast forward, huge. Yeah. Which then chapter 2 brings us into the theme of God sees and hears. In Exodus chapter 2, we're introduced to Moses, right? And we see with Moses, we see this theme of God seeing and hearing from the very beginning of Moses' life, right? We see Moses' mother Yocheved. We read in chapter 2, verse 2, that she looked upon him, she saw him, and she saw that he was good, right? What does that sound like? That sounds like kind of like the creation account, right? Genesis chapter 1, God saw his creation, he said that it was good, right? And you said something really cool, really profound. You said it's like she saw her creation, like right there, like
Mhm.
so that she created, and she looked at it and she saw it was good. It's
Yeah,
really beautiful.
it's a beautiful
Beautiful.
like parallel where like a mother looking at her baby has a reaction similar to what they describe God looking upon creation as.
Yeah. So beautiful and profound, right? And then
Yeah.
we see also Moses' sister Miriam. You'll see the same in chapter 2. You see that she stood at a distance to see what would happen to and for him. She's looking out for him. We'll get into why, you know. We also see in that same chapter the daughter of Pharaoh. She sees him in a basket. She sees the baby and she feels sorry for him. We also read in chapter 2, verse 25, that God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. We read in chapter 3 that Yahweh God says, which is God, Yahweh, I have indeed seen the misery of my people and I'm concerned about their suffering. And he says, I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them, which we see that God sees oppression, God sees pain. We see that also in Genesis with Hagar in Genesis 16:13. It says, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me, which is beautiful. So we see just already in the beginning of Exodus 2 that God, and we see echoes of it in Genesis, that God sees and he hears his people. He sees and hears us. That's beautiful. And another thing we bump into, or key thing we see in this whole book, it's about this, right? But we do see the theme of deliverance. We read in chapter 2, before God calls Moses to deliver his people, he must first deliver Moses, right? So And it was really cool. And I mentioned this to you earlier too. Like we see like this theme, or we see like this this theme of these women who are surrounding Moses, like God is using them to save his life, right? We see it even with the midwives in Egypt. The Bible, Exodus mentions two names, Shipra and Pua, which were the midwives that basically Pharaoh. We read that as they oppressed them, they multiplied, right? Like the more they oppressed them, they still multiplied. So Pharaoh came up with this plot and this plan to send the Egyptian midwives to the homes of the Israelite women, and when they gave birth, for them to kill the babies right away, or to kill the sons specifically.
Right.
But we read in Exodus chapter 1, we read that the midwives, it says the midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. So we see God using these women, right? Then we see Moses' mother in chapter 2. She says he's beautiful, but she also hid him for 3 months and put him in a basket in the Nile so that he could escape death. Moses' sister, again, she stood at a distance to see what would happen to him, right? The daughter of Pharaoh opened the basket, saw the boy, felt sorry for him. Even her maidservants, they went into the Nile and fetched the baby among the reeds, right? So we see midwife, mother, sister, daughter, wife. Each woman courageously defies Pharaoh, working within her sphere of influence to resist injustice and to deliver he who would deliver God's people. So, and that's so profound. Ladies, look at this. Women power, girl power, doing the will of God and God using them like as as his vessels to deliver Moses before Moses even delivered to people, right? Which is great, beautiful. We even see like characteristics here of Eve as these women defend this life or this offspring. We've learned that the meaning of Eve is what? Life or living, right? So we also see here like the enmity between the serpent and the woman, the serpent being like Pharaoh, and these even with these midwives of these women, like we're not gonna give in to what you want us to do, and we're gonna protect the offspring, right? We read in Genesis chapter 3, verse 14 through 15. I'm gonna share it here really quickly so you guys can read along with me here. It says, "So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and of all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust of all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers." Look at that. And we see it already in Exodus. We see this like echoing in
Yeah.
Exodus chapter 2.
They've introduced us to the snake, the heel biter. They told us about Pharaoh, and they've brought imagery that makes us think, oh, this is an ankle biter. So then you're looking for, well, so where's the offspring of the woman? And then lo and behold, we see this child who's got so many, like, it's bringing such attention to the women that are
Yeah.
around him and protecting him. And so it's really feels very intentionally evocative of being like, and here's the offspring of the woman.
Yeah. Where are my women at? Where are my women in the comments? Look at that. Look how God uses the women as his vessel to show that he sees us. He hears us. He protects us. Like uses these women to be a vessel that delivers the deliverer. That's incredible. That's beautiful. Yeah, here we go. Woman, woo, woo. Which then we get into chapter 3, which brings us into our next theme, which is we've seen it in Genesis, but we see another theme birthed from that theme here. The theme we saw in Genesis was sacred space, and we see that coming from sacred space is the theme of holy ground, right? Exodus chapter 3, verse 1 through 5. Um, right now, we're reading is about the burning bush. So I'll should put it up here for you guys. And I don't know, Ben, you want to read this for me? Go right ahead and read that for me.
All right. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within. I need to get the next one.
within. Is it there? Yeah, it's right here.
Oh,
From
sorry.
within. Sorry. It's there.
Where
Right
you go?
here.
All
From
right,
within the bush.
from within the bush. Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for where you are standing is holy ground.
Right. So what do we see here? What is this saying about holiness, about holy ground? That holiness is where God is. Holiness is where his presence abides. Where his presence is absent, there is no holiness. What else do we see here? God defines. We see that God defines what is holy, right? Not just in his being, but with his words. We read in Genesis that the ground was cursed because God cursed it with his words. But we see that this ground is holy because God called it holy. So holiness is where God is. And God defines what is holy, not just in his being, but in what he says is holy, which is powerful. You see that is really, really incredible. So, and like really cool pastor's comment here. It says, if Pharaoh's the ankle biter now and the serpent would face curses and judgment, I wonder what will be in Pharaoh's fate. Let's see. We'll get into that. As we continue to chapter 3, we also hit this next theme that we revisit from Genesis,
Yeah.
and that theme is what's in a name, right? So as we read in Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, we read that Moses becomes Pharaoh's daughter's son, right? And she names him Moses, which means the meaning of Moses' name is I drew him out of water. Here in chapter 3, God calls Moses by name and tells him who he is. God explains what is in his name, Yahweh. So I'm going to put the passage up here too. Then it's going to break up again.
I'll just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Here we go. Then he said, being gone, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have. Oh, that's where you're.
There you go. It's okay.
I can.
I'll continue it. I'll
All
put
right.
it here. Right? But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, What is his name? Then what should I tell them? God says to Moses, I am who I am. That is what you are to say to the Israelites. The I am has sent you. And I'm going to put that here. Because God also says to Moses, Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. I find this so powerful. I love this passage. This is my name forever. The name you shall call me from generation to generation. So God establishes his name, not just in this conversation, not just in this moment, This is my name that you shall call me from generation to generation forever. Right? So God calls Moses by name at the burning bush, but to call Moses by name to fulfill the meaning of his name, which Moses' meaning of his name is what again? To draw the water, right? And Moses will draw his people, Israel, out of Egypt. But God also establishes the principle and the importance of names by establishing his own name. And that's powerful.
Mhm.
Incredible. Um,
A good, we've mentioned it before, but it might be just a good little reading the Bible note, that when you see in your Bible, you'll see the Lord, and Lord will be in all caps. This is where God's name was originally in the text. And that name is what's being revealed to us here, of Yahweh, which is rooted out of the Hebrew phrase for I am. In fact, in a lot of versions, you might see that when God says to Moses, "I am who I am," that is also in all caps, because it's referencing God's name. So just we mentioned it before, but in case anyone didn't know that, that's when you see the Lord, his specific name was used there
yeah.
when it was all caps.
Yeah, all caps.
All
Like,
caps.
Yahweh.
Yeah.
God, me. So but we also enter or we see this new theme in chapter 3, which is the theme of worship, right? We're introduced to worship in this chapter. Um so again, this also introduces the theme of worship. To worship is to show what is worship? To worship is to show reverence and adoration. So God wants to free his people, bring them back to Mount Sinai so that they may worship him. Now, it's not that this generation of Israel has not been already exposed to worship. They have been exposed to worship, but in Egyptian culture, in Egyptian context, right? But God wants to bring them to true worship, to what worship is meant to be, worship unto him, right? So, and we'll piggyback off of that, like that I want you to worship me. I want you to come back to me. We'll see that as we read Exodus. Um, Another theme as we go into chapter 4 that we bump into or we see is the theme of called and commission. So, as we know, we read in Genesis that Adam and Eve were called and commissioned, right? Reading Genesis chapter in the beginning of Genesis. We also read that Noah was commissioned, right, to build the ark, right? We read Abraham was commissioned, et cetera, et cetera. We see a lot of calling and commissioning in Genesis, right? But as we just read in chapter 3, God calls and commissions Moses to be the vessel that he uses to set his people free. We'll read in chapter 4, verses 1 through 2. It says, Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you?' Then the Lord said to him, 'What is that in your hand?' 'A staff,' he replied. So we see here God equipping Moses with this staff, right? And giving him instruction on what to do. Not only just giving him staff, but telling him what to do with that staff, right? And he also accompanies it with signs and wonders. But because Moses feels inadequate, God also, and believe me, God, he's angry at this point because he's showing his signs and his wonders, and Moses is still like, but what if I'm not good enough? But even in his anger, God also provides and graces Moses with a gift, which brings us into the theme of the mediator. So, what is this gift that he gives Moses? God gives Moses his brother Aaron to speak for him and accompany him. And we'll see this develop more later on. We'll see it not only through Exodus, we'll see it throughout the Leviticus, and we'll see it throughout those books as well. But God then gives Moses in Midian clear instructions on what to do with the power he has given him. So he gives him the mediator, Aaron, right? And he equips him and he calls him and he commissions him and he equips him to do what he commissioned him to do. But God does also let Moses know that despite the signs and the wonders that Pharaoh will witness, he will also harden Pharaoh's heart. And he says in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22 through 23. And I'll put it here, and Ben, you can read that here.
Okay. Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go so he may worship me. But you refused to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son.
And this introduces the theme of the firstborn, right? So God here, he's already alluding to what he will do to Egypt's firstborn son and Pharaoh's firstborn son. And he also gives them the instruction that he will give the Israelites when this does happen. We're going to put a pin on that because we're going to touch on that again. We're going to come back to that. But real quick before we move forward, I just want to clearly, I guess, put out there or talk about the purpose of release. Like, why does God want to deliver the Israelites? Like, what is the point? Why does he want to deliver them? And we read the answer. We know the answer. We read it in Exodus chapter 5, verse 1. And it says, Yahweh, the God of Israel, says this: send away my people so that they may celebrate a festival in my honor in the wilderness. But then we see in verse 2, we see Pharaoh replies. He says, who is Yahweh that I should listen to his voice by sending Israel away? I do not know Yahweh, and furthermore, I will not send Israel away. And just like God said he would, we see that Pharaoh refuses to let the people go, right? And after this, just, to get us, keep us moving on in Exodus, we see that Moses and Aaron try to get the Israelites to like, come, let's take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord. But the Pharaoh hears about this. This causes Pharaoh to increase their workload, and this made the Israelites very angry at Moses and Aaron. Poor Moses, like Aaron too, but poor Moses. He's already having this conversation that literally gets heated between him and God about what if they don't listen to me? What if this? What if that? I'm slow of speech. How can I speak for you? And then now we have this incident where the Israelites are angry at Moses and Aaron, right? But this will bring us into the theme, to a new theme in Exodus, the theme of mighty hand. Right? So in the midst of the people being angry at Moses, God still promises deliverance by his mighty hand. And we'll read in Exodus chapter 5, verse 22 through chapter 6, verse 1. And then I'm going to post it, and you can go ahead and read that.
Moses returned to the Lord and said, why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see that what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country.
So you said something really profound in the Bible study before the Bible study, kind of how like we see like the shift, right? Like the shift of like between Genesis and Exodus, like that in Genesis kind of God like taking a step back a little bit, but here in Exodus, like God is like, this is who I am. I'm revealing myself to these people, and I'm calling the shots. Like this is what I say is gonna happen, it's gonna happen. And you see it here, like now that you will see what I do to Pharaoh, because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. So we see like God's mighty hand in this way that we haven't seen before, right?
Yeah, it's very like how I described it actually when I was trying to put my finger on this tonal shift was that in Genesis, God feels like this very he's this almost like a cloaked figure, like tonally. But then in Exodus, it's like he rips the cloak off and we see him and we see Yahweh and he's in armor and he's there to save his people. And it's very like, here's who I am. And I'm showing myself in my glory to you. I'm showing who I am. Later, he'll even show what it is that I care about. What do I love? What do I not love? Right, through his laws and things like that. It's very like he's saying here. You will see what I'm going to do. You'll see who I am.
Yeah,
And it gets repeated several times throughout
yeah.
Exodus.
Because of my mighty hand, he
Right.
will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of the country. So as we continue into chapter 6, we see another key theme, the key theme of covenant. And we read in chapter 6, verse 2 through 5, it says, God also said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. So you see this theme. We see that theme in Genesis too, but we see it highlighted here. Like we said it's highlighted here that God is a God of covenant, and we see that this covenant, that this especially this covenant with Abraham, Isaac, that He made to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, definitely holds weight to God, and it actually drives a lot of decisions or taking back decisions, taking back certain decisions or things that he might have wanted to do based on this covenant. So we see this powerful theme through what you see it throughout the Word of God, the Old Testament of covenant. So, like he said, he heard that going into of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving. He remembers his covenant. He's going to deliver them with his mighty hand. So, what does God do to deliver the Israelites? What does he use? He uses the plagues, which then brings us back into that theme of mighty hand. So I'll just go through the plagues quickly. We can definitely you can read it in Genesis. A lot of us probably already know it, but I'm posted here. We can go through them quickly. The plagues are water turning to blood, frogs, lice, flies, livestock pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and like we discussed before, this theme of firstborn, the killing of the firstborn. And I love what Samantha said here. Yes, he's revealing himself. He's proving who he is. Absolutely. He's definitely revealing himself to these people that in a way that they have not experienced him. Like, remember, they were in slavery for 400 years, right? Like Joseph heard from God, maybe his father Jacob, like they had these interactions with God, heard from God, but there's 400 years of slavery oppression that can break a people, a that can break generations, you know,
Mhm.
and
And
they've never. Go ahead,
and
Ben.
God even tells Moses that he did not reveal himself to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob by his name. He says, "By my name, I did not reveal myself to them." So
Hmm.
that's even learning that we're learning that like there, if you sense this sort of distance almost in Genesis, that was very real. He's acknowledging it here. Like yes, there was, but that's over now. I'm now here, and I'm not. There's I want everyone to know exactly who I am now.
Yes, yes. Mm. I want to reveal myself to my
Yeah.
people, right? Um, which is incredible. It's beautiful. So yeah, like I said, the 10 plagues we have it here, like frogs, lice, flies. Oh my, livestock pestilence, craziness. It even
Right.
says the darkness was so dark that you can feel the darkness. Imagine how much darkness that is. It's just so to get the imagery in your mind of how terrible these plagues were, right?
Mhm.
Um, but we see that as these plagues pass, and as the plague of the killing of the firstborn is about to happen, starting, God is beginning. He begins to prepare Moses and Aaron to prepare the people for the Exodus, right? So God gives them instructions for this event called the Passover, which would become something sacred and observed by the Hebrew people even to this day. That is something sacred to the Hebrew people and celebrated by them as well. So the plague of the killing of the firstborn happens. It says there's a cry in Egypt like no other. Terrible cry in Egypt. So Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron and tells them to get up, leave, and go worship the Lord as they requested before, right? Which brings us again into the theme, another key theme, covenant instructions. As we talk about the Passover, that's the theme that we hit, covenant instructions. So the Passover. What is the Passover, right? Hebrew word for Passover is pasash, which can mean literally to pass over, to spare, or to protect. So understand that this event also initiates a new calendar for Israel, right? Where they start to commemorate the Passover and eventually Jubilee. We've learned about that in church as well, and other important dates. So it's literally like this new creation event. Sounds familiar? Familiar. Fulfilling God's promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, verse 13 through 14. Now I posted here. Ben, go ahead and read that to me. Read that.
Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions."
And that's exactly what we see happen. We see that happen, and God keeps His covenant. He keeps His promise to Abraham. And I always found it very profound that He would tell Abraham about this, because when you read the next verse, He says, "But you won't see that. You're gonna die. You're gonna be buried, and you're
Yeah.
with your ancestors, and it's gonna be fine." But God decides to tell Abraham to speak this promise to Abraham, a promise that he wouldn't see with his physical eyes. But
Mhm.
even though Abraham is long gone, he's dead, that's how much covenant means to God, that he'll keep his promise to a person that won't even see it, even if they get to see it with their own physical eyes.
And it even may be that he tells Abraham such that Abraham will continue to pass that knowledge down. So
Yeah,
when that period of time comes, they know that there's deliverance at the end of
yeah.
it.
So when they are in slavery, they have that word to hold on to.
Mhm.
And that's amazing. That's incredible. So as we read about Passover, we continue to read about it in chapter 12, verse 23 through 28. I'll post it here and I'll read it out because it might not put the whole thing up, but let's see. I'll read it here. So Exodus chapter 12, verse 23 to 28. And they're talking about the Passover, the killing of the firstborn, that place about to happen. When the Lord goes through the land and to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and the sides of the door frame, and will pass over that doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. So this is something that he wants them to continue to remember, right? It's something he's establishing with them. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, "What does this ceremony mean to you?" then tell them, "It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians." Then the people bowed down and worshiped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. So we continue to read about the Passover that God gives certain restrictions. He gives covenant instructions when it comes to the Passover. Who can participate in the Passover? God also mentions circumcision as the approved sign of covenant. So you see that theme of covenant instructions as he gives them the Passover. He explains the Passover to them and how they should continue to do it for generations to come, and to tell of this story, to tell of what God did for them in Egypt. So, and again, if anybody has anything to add, questions, go right ahead. We're looking at the comments, so feel free.
I think the Passover meal itself, the way it's described here too, is so like they're just coming out of this plague of darkness, and now there's this plague of the firstborn, which could be really scary. I mean, they know that they've been told they've got to put the blood over the doorpost to make sure it passes over them,
Hmm.
and they're being told to prepare because you're leaving like tonight.
Yeah.
Like this is the end of it, right? So like unleavened bread, you don't have time for bread to rise. You need to make a quick meal. You need to be wear your going out clothes because you're going to be leaving. Be ready, be packed, be ready. eat it, have a quick meal, you know.
It's time to go.
Yeah,
It's
because it's
time to
about
go.
to be time to head out. It's
Yeah.
really there's a tension almost to it. That's really
Yeah, like an
great.
expectancy, like I can't imagine. I can't even imagine how that must have felt for these people. And then to see it happening in real time, hearing this great wail in Egypt as
Right.
this happens, but literally being able to hear and witness God's mercy over you and your household.
Mm,
That is profound,
yeah.
insane, profound. So as we continue into chapter 13, we hit that key theme again of the firstborn, right? So, as we see so far, and we will continue to see, there's a great significance to the firstborn, like great significance to God about the firstborn. Um, and I'll read this, Exodus 13:2. It says, "The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male, the first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." So, what is established here? What is God saying here? That the firstborn belong to Yahweh, right? So, Yahweh makes a claim on the firstborn, and his claim on the firstborn of Egypt extends to the Israelites as well. So, every firstborn belongs to him, and he and must be sacrificed in the case of an animal or redeemed in the case of children. So, this he establishes this principle that the firstborn belongs to me. And we see that here.
Mhm.
And as we continue into chapter 14, Israel and Moses, they reach the Red Sea, and we see them crossing the Red Sea, which brings us to a theme that you touched on in Genesis, which is this
Very
theme of,
briefly.
yeah, very briefly, but we'll touch on it briefly here too. This theme of the waters, right? So we read that God uses the water in Genesis 6 to cleanse the earth, right? But
Mhm.
has mercy and preserves a remnant of people, which is Noah and his family. But God again, here in Exodus, we see that God again uses the water to bring upon his will, to free a remnant of people, and
Mhm.
to cleanse them, deliver them, and birth them out of their slavery. And it was
And
very,
it's even been touched on in Exodus even a little earlier with Moses in on the Nile after his mother when he's a baby puts him in the basket and he's delivered
mm,
through the Nile. And in fact, and that's not even the word for the basket that she puts Moses in is tava, which is the same word that's used to describe Noah's Ark. That's used to
mm.
identify Noah's Arks. It's the only two things in the Bible that are called that word are Noah's Ark and the basket that baby Moses is put into.
You can't say things like that and not have that word. You gotta find it.
It's tava. It's tava.
Wow, okay, there you go.
Yeah,
Wow, that's so profound.
it's
That
like
is so
contain.
awesome.
It literally means something like container.
That is awesome. Come on. That is incredible. Wow. Anyways, well, we see as we continue on, we see between chapters 14 and 18, the Israelites experiences that they get to experience God's signs and his wonders, right? We see his provision with the man and the quail, right? And we see his promise to be with them being carried out. We read about that between chapters 14 and 18. We read about these things. Um, but we even read about we encounter this key theme that we for the first time we see it here, but we will continue. Rest assured, continue to see it in the rest of the Old Testament. This theme of wars and battles. Um, we see this. We see Israel literally experience their first war against the Amalekites, and they get to experience firsthand the faithfulness of God in battle. They get to experience His mighty hand, right, in battle, how He delivers them, even He delivers them into victory. Like, and you mentioned something like, isn't that kind of mean, like, kind of like
It's
grimy with the Amalekites to kind
yeah,
of,
the Amalekites. Every time I read it, it's just like, man, these people just left Egypt, and they're just immediately beset upon by a group of people who want to attack them and steal. I mean, to be fair, they're traveling with a bunch of very valuable things from Egypt, but
Yeah.
it's just it's a very it paints a very clear picture of like it's a cold world out here, and so
Yeah.
it is a scary place out there.
The
But it
wilderness is
also, like
real.
you were saying, paints the picture of but God's with them and God's going to protect them.
Yeah. So they get to witness God's protection and his mighty hand in that way too. But man, they jumped them in the wilderness.
Yeah,
It's like it's real out here in this wilderness. Don't come here with riches and act like we're not gonna attack you.
and 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 it is depicted as a terrible thing. I mean, God is very mad at the Amalekites for this and makes promises to blot their name out from the world and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So they thought they was gangster. God is more gangster.
yeah,
Anyway. But after that battle, after the signs and wonders, yeah, we see in chapter 19. I
sorry.
know,
So Pastor
it.
Ezekiel said
I
this.
saw it.
Yeah, yeah. You wouldn't want to hang out in the wilderness too long, would you?
Yeah, you don't you would think so, but anyway.
Certainly wouldn't want to spend 40 years there.
Nah, who does? Why would you? But anyways, we see this happening. They get through the war, the first war and battle. God delivers them into victory. And then we get to chapter 19 where they reach Mount Sinai. And this is where we see the theme of covenant relationship. Right. So Mount Sinai, here Mount Sinai, to paint the picture here. God is proposing covenant relationship to Israel. He's presenting himself and his reason for delivering them. He's telling them why he delivered them, which is to bring them to himself, right? So it's time for Moses to become this mediator, like this priest between God and the people. Now, what does this tell us about covenant relationship? That covenant always requires more than one party, right? It's not just see here that it's not just God coming to the people, but God wanting the people to come onto Him, right?
Mhm.
And we'll read that in Exodus 19, uh, verse 3 to 6. I'm gonna put this here, and you go ahead and read it, Ben. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all of the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." Israel responds.
Response. Oh, there. Here you go. Sorry, I didn't know if you saw it.
The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord.
Here you go. So God then tells. So here we see this. God proposes covenant relationship and everything that has, and He proposes His reasoning behind delivering them. Like He says, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, how I have carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Beautiful,
Beautiful.
beautiful. Like, and it's not like we see these proposals that are like, blah. Hey, you want to do this thing? Want to go and get married in Vegas real quick, or do this thing? Here, God proposes, this is what I did. This is why I did what I did, and and it's to bring you back to me. Now, how will you respond to that? And Israel responds, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So they say yes, right? So Israel says yes. God then tells Moses that he will come to him in a dense cloud so that the people could hear him speaking to Moses. And this way, and it says in Exodus that this way they can establish a trust in Moses. Now, you really like, well, what do you mean? Like, shouldn't the people already trust Moses? They followed him. They followed him out of Egypt. You mean like there's no? What do you mean? There might not be a trust there? Well, honestly, the people could have been following Moses just so they could be set free, just so they could get out of that joint, so they could break them out of that joint. Um, not because it could have been because they wanted to be free, not because they truly believed that he was sent from God to deliver them, right? But God does this so that if anyone had doubt if Moses was truly sent by God, Here is where they get that validation, right? Which brings us again into the theme of sacred space, holy ground, right? In the same way he did to Moses at the burning bush and the people in the Passover, after the people respond with their yes, God again gives them specific restrictions and instructions. And here we see the link between consecration and holiness. Now, what does it mean to consecrate, right? We hear that all the time, like consecrate yourselves, consecration, right? Consecrate is the act of dedicating yourself to someone or to something, right? So the Lord tells Moses to tell the people to consecrate themselves, wash their clothes, and be ready by the third day. Because on that day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. So it's like, tell the people to get ready, wash their clothes, clean themselves up nice, because I'm coming down on Mount Sinai to meet with the people that have said that I want to come into covenant relationship with, that said yes to me,
It's
right?
almost like a wedding.
Yeah, like a wedding. And Moses is the priest. And he's like, okay, God, I'll tell the bride. I'll let her know what to
Mhm.
do, right? So on the third day, God keeps, God keeps his promise. The third day, God consumes Mount Sinai, just like he did the burning bush. Let me pass this emojis from burning bush to mountain
Yeah.
lava.
In fact,
Yeah,
it could be a good place actually to mention some of those reading may have noticed that when Moses first goes to this mountain, it's called Mount Horeb, but
yeah.
now it's being called Mount Sinai.
Mm.
And what I understand to be the reason for that is actually in Hebrew, the word for bush that is used there, which is used for only this word doesn't appear anywhere else other than to refer to this bush, is sineh, is the Hebrew word for the bush. So that's formed their new name for this mountain. Is it's now from Sineh, Sinai, um,
Wow.
and so that's why it has a new name. And so it's like, and like they're pointing out, like we went from this little burning bush to now the mountain is engulfed in fire and smoke, and
Yeah, for like, and wow, it's so profound. And like Pastor said, Moses officiating one of the biggest weddings in history. But like all weddings, there's drama. Anyway, there's drama for the mamas
all
and the
weddings.
daddies. Not all weddings, not my wedding, not your wedding, right, Ben? But some weddings,
But
I
this was a
guess.
pretty dramatic wedding that they're having over at Mount
This
Sinai.
one brings the drama. Anyway, so we read again on the third day, God consumes Mount Sinai just like he did the burning bush. And we see that the people tremble. They are afraid. They're like, oh, okay, okay, this is God, okay. They are afraid. And we read, like, and just so you can really imagine this setting, right? We read that there was a loud trumpet blast and that the smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. Like, this is what these people are seeing, right? And as the trumpet, it says that the trumpet grew louder and louder, the people witnessed Moses speaking to God. And even more amazingly, God speaking to him back, speaking back to him, which is incredible. So again, this is the validation for the people, so that the people can trust that Moses was sent from God, that they can trust that what he has said to them already and the instructions he had already given them are from God. And so that they can also trust that the words and instructions that he's about to give them also come from God. And it is up on Mount Sinai where God gives Moses the Ten Commandments, where we see that theme again, the key theme of covenant instructions, right? So, Exodus chapter 20, the, the cool trick that now I don't forget where it's at in the Bible. Because we all know the Ten Commandments are in Exodus, right? But where are they? Like, where exactly can I find them? Pastors taught us this cool trick. Like, 10 commandments, 10 times 2 is 20. So they're in Exodus chapter 20. That's how I remember it for whatever reason. But we're in chapter 20, the 10 commandments. And we see here that, we read early in Exodus that these 10 plagues took out a nation. But now these 10 instructions, these 10 commands will build one up, which is profound. Awesome. And before he gives the instructions, Yahweh God says, I am the Lord your God. Again, he says, I am the Lord your God that brought you out of Egypt. Before he gives any commands, any instructions, he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, emphasizing that Yahweh is not to be confused with any other gods. Like, I am the Lord your God. I am Yahweh that brought you out of Egypt, right? Which then will bring us into the next key theme, the theme of idolatry. We read Exodus chapter 20, verse 3 through to 4, and verse 7. The first three commandments have to do with idolatry. This is how important like to God's heart it is for him not for us not to for them not to confuse him with any other god or idol. Like the first three commandments are, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven, above, or on the earth, beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. So it's talking about idolatry a little bit. The core idea behind idolatry was to provide what? This physical, tangible representative, whether it be a statue, a little statue, big statue, whatever it is, this tangible representative that you can see, you can feel, of a deity on earth, right? And to maintain the favor of that deity, you had to care for the physical idol, right? Care for this idol. But Yahweh is making it very clear that he is not to be depicted as other idols were. Like, I am not to be approached. I am not to be depicted. I am not. Don't make an image of me, graven image, like you've seen other gods, like you see have been done for other gods. Like, I am not those idols. I am Yahweh God, and he makes it very clear to the people, and he wants to understand. No idols. You think they'd get it,
Mhm.
but we move
And,
on.
and it's so, I think that it's just worth, you know, one of the big problems with idols is one, the worshiping of other things which are not God, but also at the very least both an entire misunderstanding of God and a misunderstanding of themselves, because
Mm-hmm.
they are meant to be the image of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
These idols, which are supposed to be images of gods, to think one, that God could be represented by an image of anything other than what he put his image into, which was human beings. It's to diminish God and to diminish themselves.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So it's like it's a sin towards God, but it even angers God that it's that basically like it's a sin towards who He created you to be.
Right.
Like it's sin towards yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So wow, like but like I said, He makes it very very clear. God makes it very clear. Like, I am not like these idols. I am not to be depicted like them. There's no, we don't even belong in the same sentence. I
Right.
am God. I am Yahweh God. And as we continue to read chapter 20, we continue to read about the Ten Commandments. We hit the theme again, theme that you hit in Genesis, entitled Sanctify Sabbath, right? We read in Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. I'm going to think I posted it here. No, sorry, I did not do it. Hold on. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 11. You can read that then. And
Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Neither you, nor your son or your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
yeah, so you see what was established, what God established and demonstrated in Genesis in the creation, right? God is now inviting these people to do the same. So is not to be also lazy for 6 days and then rest on the seventh. No, diligent and good work the 6 days and rest on the seventh. So he
And
invite. Go right ahead, man.
I just wanted to say, and just in the reinforcement of the importance of this, if you'll notice, so that mentions all of the people who have to, it seems redundant almost. Like, it's like, why is it listing all of these people? You, your son, your daughter, your male or female servant, your animals, or any foreigner residing in your town. It lists seven different groups of people
Yeah.
just to reinforce the importance of the seventh day Sabbath.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even notice that. You notice all these things. That's so awesome. That's so great. That's amazing. That is
It's
awesome.
the biblical authors are just masters at this kind of stuff, and they weave these things in all over the place. This happens all the time.
Yeah. Like,
I don't know how
wait,
many times I'm like, why are they doing this? And then I start counting, and I'm like, oh,
I get it. Seventh day, seven groups. I get
yeah.
it. Bravo. Bravo. But so yeah, so we see again, he said like what is established in creation, God is inviting the people to do the same, right? He's establishing this principle of rest, right? Of setting it apart, of keeping it holy, which to make something holy is to set it, is to be set apart, right? Holy is to be set apart. And then we read the rest of the commandments. The rest of the commandments are what you would call prohibition laws, meaning just these are things that God does not permit them, and to this day, us to do. If we're supposed to follow, you know, the Ten Commandments as well. So um, these prohibition laws are as follows. I'll read them here. Just read them quickly through. Honor your mother and your father, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor, you shall not cover your neighbor's house, you shall not cover your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Your neighbor. So the Ten Commandments closes off with these prohibition laws, right? But we see when we read that Israel continues to be afraid of God. But Moses tells them, listen, don't be afraid of God. God is just testing. He's come to test you so that you may fear him, so you may revere him. Not be afraid of him, fear him, but revere him. Unfortunately, we see that Israel quickly fails that test, right? And that brings us in, as we continue to read it along, that brings us into the theme that we touched on in Genesis as well, the theme of offering and sacrifice, right? We read that God tells Moses to make him an altar, right? And to sacrifice burnt offerings. Burnt offerings are sheep, goats, cattle. And God is specific. God is very specific again with Moses. He tells him, I do not want the altar to be built with dressed stones. Dressed stones could be like anything like jewelry or anything like that. Or stones that you would have to use a tool to build it. So don't build it with stones that now you had to come and use a tool to make this altar happen. Like, so I want us to put a pin in that. Remember that. God gives Moses instructions to build him an altar, but not with dressed stones or any stones that he would have to use a tool to build that. Remember that, guys. Put a pin in that. Right? And if we continue to read chapters 21 to 31, we see that God continues to establish with Moses rules and guidance and wisdom for the people, how they should approach and or handle different circumstances and situations that might come up, and that would definitely arise, right? But it's in chapter 32 that we see Israel break the first three commandments as they build a golden calf idol. And like, remember I said to put a pin in that on the instructions that God gave Moses on how to build the altar for him? Ironically, Israel disobeys the instruction that God gives Moses on how to build the altar. They create this golden calf with dressed stones, jewelry, and they fashion it with a tool. So it's very cool to see that, like, they weren't there for that conversation, but we see that as they build this golden calf, as they break the commandment, they even break God's God's instructions to Moses on how to build an altar for him, right? As they build this altar, as they build this idol for these gods, right? These false gods, which brings us into the theme of, again, of whose wisdom, right? So again, let's paint. Let's bring us to Exodus chapter 32. Remember Aaron? You remember Aaron, right? The mediator, right? So Aaron, while Moses is up in Mount Sinai with God, receiving these instructions, building this altar, getting this guidance, this wisdom, the commandments from God, Aaron is down on the mountain with the people.
Mhm.
And here we see Aaron, remember, he represented this mediator for Moses. We now see him act as shrewdly or as wise as the serpent. And it just confirms what Pastor said too. Like one day you can be for God, you can use God, be using God's wisdom, and one day you can be the shrewd snake.
Mhm.
It really just depends on the day. It depends on what you choose, right? So here we see Aaron, who was this mediator, who God gave him to Moses as a gift, as this tool for this commission to deliver the people, right? We see him now switch sides and act from a mediator to a shooty little snake, shooty serpent. Because the people, they see that Moses is taking a long time up in the mountain, so they go and they revert to their Egyptian ways and they ask Aaron to make them gods. Because they're like, we don't know what happened to this Moses guy, so can we go and can we make these gods for ourselves? Because this is what we don't know what else to do. This is what we want to do. And Moses would later say that Aaron leads the people into sin as he collects their jewelry and treasures, and they create this golden calf, and they state, the people of Israel then state, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." What a slap in the face to God, right? As he gives Moses the commandments, he says, before he says any commandments, he said, "I am the God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt." And here is Israel saying this about the golden calf. These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. What a slap in the face. It's very sad. You think very sad reading it, because with all the evidence that we're given that showed them that it was Yahweh God who brought them out of Egypt, God telling them on the mountain that He brought them out of Egypt, why He brought them out of Egypt. Yeah, like exactly. Didn't God just say that I'm the one who brought you out? He tells them He brought them out. He tells them why He brought them out. He gives this amazing, beautiful proposal for covenant with these people, and they still build this path, and they say this is the gods that brought us out of Egypt. What a slap in the face, right? Um, so they still choose to declare that these gods brought them out of Egypt, right? Then here comes Aaron again. Again, he says, "You know what? I'm gonna build an altar in front of this golden calf, and I'm gonna declare tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." Another slap to the face to the God that delivered them, so that God said this in His own words, that they may celebrate a festival in my honor in the wilderness. God said in chapter 5, verse 1. So here's God stating his heart, stating why he wants to deliver them, so they can come and celebrate a festival in my honor in the wilderness. I am the God that delivered them. And here go the people, and here go Aaron attributing this to these false gods. And it's like you said, it's offensive to God, but it's offensive to who they are, who God created them to be. And while this is happening, Moses is not aware of this until God tells him. He tells Moses, "Come down from the mountain because these people have become corrupt. They are going crazy down there. They're wilding out. You need to come down from the mountain," right? Which then brings us to that theme again of God sees and hears. And I don't know, Ben, I know I'm talking a lot, but I don't know if you want to. You're pretty good at telling me when you want to say something, but I wanted to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, no. Please keep going. I I know that there's got to be people that have some questions, and I haven't seen questions in the chat yet. So just a reminder for everyone that they can ask questions.
It's true. Yeah, look, Pastor, if anything, they could have at least built an eagle. That's true. He said that God like eagle's wings. Like, why would you
Oh,
build a cat? There has to be something behind it too. I just haven't looked into it, but yeah, why a calf? Anyway, like I said, as we continue to read into chapter 32, we see the theme again of God sees and hears. But this time, instead of hearing the cries of Israel, hearing the cries and seeing their persecution, God says in chapter 32, verse 9, he says, I have seen the people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are a stiff necked people. So God sees them in the turmoil, he sees them in the pain, he sees them in the suffering, but he also sees them in this setting, and he says, they are stiff necked people.
Mhm.
So this causes God to become very angry. He wanted to destroy them. We read that he wanted to destroy them and make Moses to a great nation. He's like, Moses, I've done this before. I know how to wipe out these people. I could do
Yeah.
it again. I
And he's
could
like,
do
and
it
he's like,
again.
I can technically fulfill the covenant through you.
Through you, you're here. And I know how to do this. I know how to wipe off humanity. I can
Right.
wipe these people out. Like, I won't use water because I said I won't, but there's other ways to do this thing. But then so like I said, this caused God to be very angry. He wanted to destroy them and make Moses into a great nation. But we see then, this causes us to see that theme again of the mediator, right? We see Moses, as he will many a time after this, right, act as a mediator for the people,
Mhm.
right? So we see him literally he asked God to have mercy on the people by remembering to have mercy on these people. Not because necessarily they doing what they're doing, but have mercy on these people because of the covenant you made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He tells God to remember the covenant he made to them. And he tells God of his own word, his own promise, right? And this is what causes God to have mercy on them and not destroy them. He also mentioned that I'm saying this the most like abbreviated way, but he also tells God like it's not in your character and like it's against who you are. And also, what would the Egyptians think if they see this God that delivered them to the wilderness only to kill them?
Right. He's like, you said that you did all of this to make a demonstration. What is this going to demonstrate? This
Yeah,
is.
yeah, exactly. What is this going to demonstrate? This is going to demonstrate that you want to bring them back to you. What would this say about you?
Mm.
You know, and
Yeah.
this is what causes God to have mercy on them and
Right.
not destroy them.
Right. And yeah, and so like Ezekiel's pointed out, we had a theme in Genesis, right? The judgment and mercy theme. So we're seeing that pop up again here,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
not before as well, but it's certainly very defined here. Of
yeah,
it's clear what the judgment was, and then that judgment is not carried out in full.
yeah, exactly. So we see Moses goes to the people after he makes a case for them. God decides not to destroy them. He goes to the people and he tells God, please have mercy. Don't destroy the people. But then he goes to the people and he's burnt. The Bible says he's burning with anger when he sees what he sees. And he
Yeah.
throws and breaks the tablets, the Ten Commandments, signifying that the covenant had already been broken. Like, you guys already broke this.
Yeah.
Like, we just got this, guys. You
Right.
already broke it. You already broke it. And then it says, and this is kind of savage, kind of gangster. That's why I left it in here. It says, it says that he burns the golden calf. Moses burns the golden calf, grounds it to powder, scatters the calf ashes on the water, and makes the Israelites drink it. Now, if that is not gangster, I don't know what that is.
It sounds
It's
like
so awesome.
there's something about it, and I wasn't able to put my finger on it, but it just occurred to me. It's like when like the soap in the mouth treatment
Yeah.
is what it feels like.
Now you drink this calf that you
Yeah.
made. Drink it now. But we see even after that, even after Moses has them do that, the people were still out of control. So then Moses stands in front of the entrance of the camp and he says, whoever is for the Lord, and any of you are for the Lord, who's for the Lord, come to me.
Hmm.
And we see all the Levites rally to him. So where we had the people on Mount Sinai, all the people before say, we will do what the Lord says. Now we see only the Levites stand up and say that they're for the Lord, right?
Mhm.
And as we continue to read chapter 32, we hit that theme again of holy ground. And I'll have you read chapter 32, verse 27 through 29. Then I'll put it here.
Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then
Hmm.
Moses said, "You have been set apart for the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day."
Hmm. So right profound. We hear set apart. You have been set apart to the Lord today. What it means to be holy, like I said, to be made holy is to be set apart, right? So we also see, we continue to read, we read that God then strikes the people with a plague, like
Mhm.
something that was reserved for the Egyptians to help bring God's people back to him is now afflicted on the people, because just like the Egyptians, they made a decision at this moment that they were not for the Lord,
Mhm.
right? So, and again, that theme of justice and mercy comes up again. Like, remember what God originally wanted to do was to wipe them out and say, Moses, we could do this with you. Like, we don't have to do with any of these people. He wanted
Just
to kill all of the people. Yes.
just like the original appearance of this theme in the Garden of Eden. God said what the consequences of eating of the fruit was, that day they'll die. But and so here we see God's very plainly has said, well, like you entered into this covenant, you said yes, you've
Hmm.
seen everything that I've done and brought you out of, and you're still going to betray me. You're still going to go to another god on our, like, we're in the midst of what's essentially a wedding, and then you're going to betray me,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is the consequences.
Yeah.
But what we see, just like when they actually eat of the fruit, when they go on their own wisdom, they the consequences that we are to expect are not what are dealt out. What we
Yeah.
see is a much diminished, further diminished version of that. And in
Yeah.
here, it could be hard for us to like understand how diminished, I
Hmm.
suppose. Um, I know that this is something that I was like, well, I don't know how many people there are.
Yeah.
Not to diminish that 3,000 people dying is a lot, but like how much, how if the original consequences were everyone,
Mm.
and now
Yep.
it's like 3,000 died and there's a plague and you guys had to drink
Yeah.
the calf
Yeah.
soup,
That
then
is justice and mercy.
right, then how pulled back we are,
Yeah.
and and um, it was enlightening for me to look forward into numbers where we get a census of the people that come out of Egypt, or that leave Mount Sinai, and
Yeah.
it tells us that there are over 600,000 men aged 20 and up. So we're talking about millions of people,
Yeah.
actually.
Because it's just talking about the men, not about the
Right.
women, children,
Not
elderly.
even men under 20.
Hmm.
So we're talking about 2-3 million, maybe more people, and 3,000 of them died this day when God said that the just thing to do was to get rid of all of them.
Yeah. So when you know what could have happened, what God felt should have happened, and then what really happens, what ends up happening, you can look at that and say, yeah, there has to be a consequence for what happened.
Mhm.
So, yes, people died. Yes, there was a plague. Um, but God, in His infinite mercy, we know it was supposed to be worse than that, worse than this.
Mhm. And the
It
Levites,
wasn't.
who are the ones when Moses says, "Hey, yeah, if you're for the Lord, then come here," which is all they had to do, right? Was to
Yeah.
go stand over there by Moses, and only the Levites do that. And the Levites aren't making up the majority. They aren't accounting for like 2 million of the population. So it's not like the 3,000 people are everyone who didn't go with Moses.
Yeah, no.
There would have been, and so it's to see that in context of what it could have been is to paint that picture of like of the mercy that does happen here, and it's
Yeah.
weird and it's uncomfortable to talk about the death of 3,000 people as merciful, and I want to acknowledge that for our
Yeah,
audience.
of
That's an
course.
uncomfortable thing to talk
Yeah.
about. Uh,
It's merciful in comparison to all the people.
right, and when you
Exactly.
really try to fathom what they're what they've done to go through everything that you've seen in Egypt, to see the plagues, to watch them pass over your house, to come out of Egypt with their possessions and through the Red Sea, to see the defeat of the Amalekites, to see God provide for you. We didn't even talk about some of these stories of with the manna and the water and the
Yeah.
wilderness all the way
Yeah.
to here. All of that of God very clearly trying to prove to them how much they can rely on him.
Mm.
And then they agree to a covenant with him. And then not even a couple months later, after they just haven't seen Moses in a little while,
Yeah.
they're
40
like,
days.
just forget about all of it.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
it's terrible. Like Ezekiel said, and to say that this is like a marriage that's going on is actually the sort of language that's being used in the relationship covenant and later will be referred to in the same way. And like he said, it's almost like you're getting married and your spouse on your honeymoon cheats on someone
That is, if
with
that's not
the
drama,
abusive lover that they just rescued you from.
if that's not drama in a wedding, I don't know what is. Is it drama?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like, and, we read, and we pastor talking about this the other day. We read like that Israel is this chosen people, chosen by God, which is true, right? They are they are God's chosen. They have been chosen by God, right? And they
Mhm.
are blessed. They're a blessed nation. They're a blessed people, right? But we need to understand that Israel wasn't chosen by God to only be the blessed people. Like, oh, we're God's favorites and we're His favorite kids, right? We're this blessed people. We're better than everybody else. They were chosen by God to be a blessing to other people, to the world, right? They were chosen by God to be this door, as it seems, this door, this mediator. Yes, right? You say they were chosen to be mediator in a sense, like
Mhm.
to be a blessing to the nations, right? If they were not, so if you're choosing to not be chosen to be this blessing, right? If if you're not for God, you're not above a plague, basically. That's what
Mhm.
God's saying. If you're not for me, you're not above a plague. You're not above, you know, a death. You're not above these things. Because
Mhm.
when you choose not to be for me, you're not above that. You're not above any of that, right? That's why we see this plague happen. The plagues were meant to deliver them, but then we see them afflicted by a plague
Yeah.
because they end up on the same side of Egypt, not for God, right? So, hold on,
Yeah.
I'm gonna read some
I
comments
was
here.
yeah, I was actually going to mention what Ezekiel just said too. Is God said that they would be a kingdom of priests. He wanted everyone. He didn't want just to be a certain group of people to be priests. He wanted everyone to have that close relationship with him that Moses had, even, you know, but they kind of they agree to it, and then they throw it down the train.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we continue to read, we read between chapters 32 and 35. We see a lot of amazing things happen. We see God show himself to Moses, his back, right? We see the stone tablets, Ten Commandments are remade after Moses broke them, right? We literally see God's radiance on Moses' face. And God gives Moses more rules and guidelines and instruction for the people, right? But then as we get to chapter 35, we see God give Moses the design for the tabernacle. And this again introduces the theme holy ground, but also called and commissioned, right? You can put called and commissioned if anything. That's probably better one for now. But we see So we see this process of the building of the tabernacle and even the Ark of the Covenant. We get details on how that was built as well. So just as God delivered and commissioned Moses, he has delivered Israel and has now commissioned them to follow his law, keep his covenant, and build his place of dwelling, right? So in these last chapters, they present three speeches from Moses to the community, which brings us to the theme that you touched on in Genesis, sanctify Sabbath. Moses gives the people a Sabbath reminder in chapter 35, and he basically tells them doing God's work does not cancel the Sabbath, and God's work must be done in God's way. And we also see him give covenant instructions again. We see that theme of covenant instructions. Moses about gives commands about this community participation, or this opportunity for the community to participate in the construction of the tabernacle, right? And what does he say to them? He says, everyone who is willing, like if you're willing to do this, everyone who is willing is welcome to do it. That offerings are voluntary, but it doesn't mean you just give whatever you want just because it's voluntary. They were voluntary, but they were specific. You can read about the specifics again in chapter 25 and in chapter 35. We also see that both men and women responded to this call and commission to build the tabernacle. We see leaders within the community contribute gemstones and ingredients for oil and incense for the tabernacle. We also read that the people gave more than enough for the tabernacle to be built, right? And we also see Moses calling on all who are skilled, right? We see the skilled women spinning yarn to create this tabernacle, right? And we talked about this too in the Bible study for the Bible study. Like, and where do they get these skills from? Well, yeah, they got these skills from Egypt. They learned how to do these things in Egypt. And here we have God using these skills, right? The skills of the people that they had in Egypt, using it to build his tabernacle, right?
It's also, I think, powerful to notice that when God asks for the things that will be used to turn into the tabernacle, he tells Moses to just go and let people give what their heart moves them to give.
Yes.
And when they built the calf, Aaron took from the people the
Ooh,
gold.
that's good.
And I just think that's an important juxtaposition of what.
The difference,
Yeah.
right? So that's why, like, God is like, I'm not like these idols.
Mm-hmm.
Like I operate differently. I'm not to be in the same sentence as them.
And
Like,
after all of this, he still doesn't demand something from them.
yeah, like
He
I
says,
don't
let them
demand it.
give what they're moved in their hearts to give.
Yeah, like that's why even presenting that covenant relationship on Sinai, I'm presenting this to you. I'm petitioning this to you, if you want to join into covenant with me. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's an invitation.
Yeah.
It's not a force thing. Not that God doesn't have the power and the might to force,
Right.
but it's not how he operates. It's not what he wants. And the same with his place of dwelling. He wants the people to voluntarily give.
Mm-hmm.
He wants them to use their skills. He wants if they are willing, everyone who is willing to come and build this
Mm-hmm.
place of dwelling. So we also hear Moses appoint these two men, Bezalel and Oholiab, to design this tabernacle and also teach others on how to build this thing, right? So what do we learn about them? What do we see there? We see that the Spirit of God is leading them, right? It's not just them and their skills, but the Spirit of God is leading them to design the tabernacle. We see that they use God's wisdom, his understanding, his knowledge, and also the skills that come from God, right? And as we continue to read in Exodus 39, verse 42 to 43, we see that the Israelites have done all the work that just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So they do all the work and they do it just as God commanded them to, right? So Moses, we read that Moses inspects his work. He looks around, he inspects it, and he saw that they had done it just as the Lord had commanded. So then Moses blesses them. And the tabernacle itself marks Israel. We see that this marks Israel as a community where Yahweh has chosen to dwell. Like Yahweh has chosen to dwell among Israel, and the evidence of that is part of the evidence of that is this tabernacle,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what's super beautiful and super interesting is we can go back to the very beginning of Exodus. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 11, we read, and I put it up here, What did we read? We read about how they were oppressed, right? Or how they were forced into labor, right? Part of that was this. We read, so they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh, right?
Mhm.
What is Pithom and Ramses? Store cities, what are these things? These were warehouses with supplies for Pharaoh's funerary cult or for Pharaoh's funeral. So this basically would ensure that the Egyptians would worship Pharaoh long after he died, right? So Israel was forced to build these storehouses for Pharaoh and for the worship of Pharaoh. But here we see that Yahweh now calls the people to build a tabernacle to worship him instead.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, it's profound just even thinking about how, man, the skills that they learned in building these storehouses for this idol, right? For these idols, right? For Pharaoh, right? God even uses that, the skills they learned from that, to build a tabernacle for him. And that's very profound. That's beautiful. Right?
I want to let the audience know that we're really grateful that you guys have stuck with us this
Yes,
long.
yes,
We're almost done now. If you guys have any questions that you've been holding back, start shooting them out now so that we can address them before we close, because we do
yeah.
have a bit of a delay.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Yes, we are almost done. We're getting there. And with that being said, we continue on to chapter 40, which is the last chapter in Exodus. And we hit our last key theme that's introduced in Exodus, which is following the cloud. So we read here in Exodus chapter 40, verse 34 to 38. I will have you read it, and I'm posting it now.
Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels.
Wonderful. So here we see that the Israelites follow the cloud. And it says here that when the presence of the Lord, when the glory of the Lord settled in a place, the cloud has settled on that place. Because the cloud has settled on it, the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And when that cloud would move, then they would pick up the tabernacle and they would move with it, right? And if it didn't move, they'd stay there. But they needed to go, or they only followed to where the presence of God was, showing us again that where the presence of God is, that is holy ground.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just because that's basically that that's the end kind of Exodus right there.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to share this. I thought it was really cool just to tie it into Genesis, right? Um, where can we see the creation story in Exodus? We see it in the creation of a new nation, from disorder to order, from oppression to love of neighbor, from serving Pharaoh to serving Yahweh, right? And we also see this new society shaped by a sacred time, this new calendar, right, with Passover, a sacred space, Yahweh's presence in their midst, the tabernacle, and obedience to covenant stipulations. And that is the end of Exodus. So, yay, we did it. Yay, we did it. Yay. So excited. That is the end of Exodus. And yeah, we continue into Leviticus next Bible study.
Yeah. Wow, that was awesome. That's great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all. Thank you
Yay.
everyone for sticking with us through that. I know that it's sort of a holiday night, and it's not the most romantic of marriage stories for
Yes,
Valentine's Day.
yes. And just to anyone at home that if you were taking notes or maybe you missed a couple of things, just
Yeah.
wanted to put up these key themes in Exodus. You can take a screenshot,
Mhm.
take a picture, but these are the key things we hit in Exodus. God opposes the proud, God sees and hears, deliverance, holy ground, worship, called and commissioned, the mediator, the firstborn, mighty hand, covenant instructions, wars and battles, covenant relationship, idolatry, and following the cloud. So, yes, like he said, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sticking with us. We
Yeah.
appreciate you guys. And yeah, that's the end. That's the end of Exodus. You
Yeah.
take it away. Take it away.
All right.
Ben.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you all again for joining us. Just got a few announcements. This Thursday we have Encounter Nights. Starts at 7:30. Is that right?
Yes.
7:30. And this is it's run by the youth. Everyone is welcome. Um, and then after that, we just have church on Sunday. Uh, Doors or the service will start at 10 a.m. Doors open at 9:45, and we hope to see you there.
Yes.
Am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so. I think we're good. And next Tuesday, like we said, we always say Tuesdays alternates with prayer call. So
Yeah,
next Tuesday will be
Tuesday will
prayer
be
call.
prayer call.
Yes. But after that, Tuesday after that, we will continue into our journey of the Old Testament, into key
Yep.
themes,
And
into
so,
connections.
yep, we'll be going into Leviticus, which I want to encourage
Oh,
everyone who's here, because if you're reading with us, I you're I and many of you have already gone into it. I know, like if it's been dense now, Leviticus is going to feel like, what is going on? How am I supposed to be reading this? And how am I supposed to stay engaged with this? I just want to say I know and I empathize with you, and I struggle with it too. If you skim a little, you can forgive yourself, and we will be helping you in our next Bible study 2 weeks from now. Uh, and it and but believe me, as boring as it can seem on the surface, there are a lot of really cool things going on in Leviticus,
very, very
and I'm
profound.
excited to learn more about that.
Absolutely.
As we
And
go.
just really quickly,
Yeah,
an announcement that we forgot, but Pastor put up here. This Sunday, we do have communion and
oh,
baptism. Yes.
baptism
So,
Sunday, yeah,
yes, beautiful. I encourage you to be there. If you know anyone who wants to get baptized, who's been coming, who doesn't know about it, invite friends, invite families. God is doing amazing things.
yeah.
So, join us this Sunday as
We
we
haven't
have
we
communion.
haven't gotten there yet, but baptism is a further development of that through the waters theme that we've
Yes.
been mentioning.
Spoiler alert. But anyways, thank you, Ben, for being here with me. I appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you for
you,
going
thank you
this
so much.
journey with me. So yeah, so we appreciate you guys. We pray you guys have a great night. We hope
Yeah,
to see you at Encounter Nights and to see you on Sunday in communion and baptism. All
yeah.
right. Thank you, Ben. Thank you guys.
Thank you,
Have an
Jesse. Thank
amazing
you, everyone.
thank
Keep
you.
on going.
Yes, have an amazing night. Have a great night, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
I